Welcome back to the doctor's office. I am Dr. K. Ray Knight, here to give you a proper diagnosis and prognosis and everything comics and comic book characters. Don't judge me by what I got on right now. I was going to bed when I was like, oh shit, I need to make this video real quick. So, we all know I have covered Blood Hunt extensively. From the main story to all of the tie-ins, and believe me, there were a lot. I actually still have like 13 books to pick up from the comic book store. Anyway, I wanted to kind of just give like a ranking overview of all of the books, because some of them are not necessary for the story to continue. Okay, some of them you really do not have to read. Unless you really just want to. They don't contribute to the story at all. They just happen to be affected by what's happening because, of course, it's happening across the world. So, of course, I'm going to give a 10 out of 10 to books 1 through 5 for the main Blood Hunt series. Absolutely amazing. Those are must read. Like, no questions asked. The next one that I do recommend you reading would be these are the tie-ins. The Vengeance of Moon Knight 5, 6, and 7 are included in this. 7 is the very last one, and it's rather important. And then 5 just shows what's happening as it's happening to the rest of the world, and 6 does make some contribution to what's going on. I'd say 9 out of 10 on all 3 of those. I loved all 3 of those, and the continuation of the Vengeance of Moon Knight, I'm very excited for, because, of course, the status quo in the Marvel Universe has changed. And if you remember from me doing the review for Blood Hunt 5, and at the end, Dracula is talking to Miles Morales. Miles Morales is still a vampire. He still has Varnay's blood in him, because Varnay did turn him into a vampire. T'Challa is also still technically a vampire. They are just all able, including Dracula, to walk out in the sun again. And I actually, in a review for a different book, we're going to run into that. So just be prepared. The next few tie-ins are the Amazing Spider-Man. It's number 49, and then it goes into Amazing Spider-Man Blood Hunt 1. And I think there's 3 of them. So Amazing Spider-Man number 49, and then Amazing Spider-Man number 1 through 3 for Blood Hunt. You can take or leave these. It more has something to do with Morbius than it really does anything else. Yes, they are fighting vampires, but it has everything to do with Morbius trying to find a cure for himself, as well as find a cure for the vampires. And like Colleen becomes a vampire. Misty Knight is acting like super shady, so it doesn't necessarily have anything to contribute to the overall Blood Hunt story, but there is like something going on, and between the company that took the cure that Morbius had come up with, Morbius trying to find a cure, Colleen being a vampire and being changed back, with the possibility of actually still being a vampire, depending on who turned her. I don't think Varnay turned the vampires who turned Colleen, but can't be sure. So, take or leave those. You don't have to read those unless you're just interested in that Amazing Spider-Man story. So I would say probably very average, like 6.5, 7 out of 10. On those. Next we have the Avengers 14, 15, and 16. I'm pretty sure. Definitely take or leave these. Captain America, Steve Rogers, has basically put together this makeshift team with Quicksilver, Hercules, the girl I can't remember, and Hawkeye. It seemed like Hawkeye was going to be part of the Blood Hunters story, but alas, she wasn't. She was mainly part of the Avengers team, and then there was kind of just like a break off where she was like talking or involved assisting this vampire named Dante, and then she just like immediately wanted to kill him for whatever reason. So I don't know, but it was too far. Like, there was too many things happening in between the Avengers, and their story had literally everything to do with Captain America, because he was going up against Baron Blood, and it was literally just like a thing with Captain America. They brought Quicksilver in because Quicksilver was pissed about his sister. So you could also take or leave these. I'm sure whatever continues to happen will have some bearing on what happened with this whole situation. This one I would also say was pretty average, 7 out of 10. Again, you can take or leave these like 3. Next is one of my favorites, Blood Hunters. Blood Hunters was kind of confusing because it had it as if J. Jonah Jameson's son and Hawkeye were going to be part of this team because they are on the covers of some of these, or at least 2 of these, and they're actually not part of this team of Blood Hunters. This team of Blood Hunters is literally all female. But I will talk about the new Blood Hunters spin-off series that just came from this, that just came out. So we'll talk about that in a different video. But Blood Hunters, I believe there were 3 or 4, whichever one is how many just popped up on the screen. This one was actually really, really good, and it was kind of half what was going on with like just happening around the city, and then the rest of it was putting this team together. So the team ends up being Elsa Bloodstone, Hallows Eve, White Widow, which is Yelena, and Dagger. And Dagger has been able to heal some of these vampires with her powers, and it really started with her looking for Cloak and trying to figure out how to get Cloak back, and it ended up with her being with these girls. The story with that was amazing because she got turned into a vampire, but she was able to heal herself essentially, and she turned into a vampire after she healed Yelena. So because Yelena stepped on the scene as a vampire. So 9 out of 10 for this one. The reason it's not a 10 out of 10 is because it was very, very confusing, including Hawkeye, male Hawkeye, I think female Hawkeye as well, so Kate, Clint, and J. Jonah Jameson's son, whose name escapes me, I don't know why, in here, but they're not, they end up kind of just like being in there just one time. Next is Doctor Strange 15, 16, and 17, I'm pretty sure. And the Doctor Strange ones are definitely important. Doctor Strange 15 picks up right after Blood Hunt 1, where Blade stabs him in the chest and then turns him into a vampire. So it picks up literally right after that, and then it continues on in story, and then it continues on to where the aftermath, where Dr. Doom is now the Sorcerer Supreme. So I would say probably about a 7.5, 8 out of 10 on these. The artwork is really throwing me because it goes from Blood Hunt to this artwork in the Doctor Strange, and it's just kind of like throwing me off. I do not like the I do not like the artwork, but I guess I just have to like look at the Doctor Strange books before this one to see if the artwork was the same. It's just the switch between was crazy, but the story was still really good, and it does contribute to what's happening during the Blood Hunt series and what's happening after. So the tie-in is tying in. So 7.5, 8 out of 10 on that one. My next favorite, the Dracula Blood Hunt third tie-in. So there's 3 of those. I love these. Of course, it was directly contributing to the story. Brielle and Dracula basically like start off going against each other, even though he wasn't trying to do all of that. And then we have them teaming up with the rest of the Avengers and Doctor Strange and all of them to do this fight. And suspicious, as I said in the review, his interest in this was valid because, you know, it was all of the vampires, right? And his vampire nation was in trouble. But then, of course, after everything that happens and he's standing there talking to Miles Morales, and he's like, you know, when you save the world owes you a debt, because now Dracula can walk out in a day. So, problems. But as a tie-in to the Blood Hunt story, chef's kiss. The way that he was with Brielle and how he actually interacted with Miles Morales was great for the story. Their team up was great. He was actually trying to encourage her in only the way that Dracula knows how. He knows how to do toughness, and she was questioning herself and him the entire way, and he was just like, girl, listen, kill him. He got you fucked up. Like, come on, do what you gotta do. Like, seriously. And every turn he was like, you are just like your daddy. And he would know because he has spent so much time with Blade, against Blade. So as a story, I thought it was great. I did not have a problem with anything happening here. So 10 out of 10 on the Dracula Blood Hunt tie-ins. Must read. They are tying in, okay? After that comes the Strange Academy tie-in. I believe there are 3. There may be 4. However many just popped up on the screen is how many there are. And they are also directly contributing to what is happening because they contribute to the spell that Doctor Strange is working, and how Doctor Doom, and how Doctor Doom ended up becoming Sorcerer Supreme. He needed their magic. So, while it is what is happening specifically with them, and it's Doctor Strange going to Brother Voodoo about the Montesi formula and just all that stuff, so it definitely directly contributes to what's happening and what ends up happening. So on this one, I would say probably about 8.5, 9, mainly because I wanted it to contribute just a little bit more. But considering what they were being used for, this contribution to the story was completely fine, because it ended up contributing to the ending of the story. So 8.5, 9, I would definitely read this because it is important. Next we have Venom 33 and 34. Skip. Skip card in Uno. Like, this was not anything. It didn't have anything to do with anything other than the fact that they were confronted by vampires. Venom was confronted by the Collective, and Dylan was confronted after Toxin left. Dylan was confronted by a priest alone in his room who was also a vampire and blamed Venom for him being a vampire because he didn't call out to Venom for help. Venom's supposed to just be fucking psychic. What this was an introduction to the Venom Wars, because Maruta showed up, or Meridian showed up, and I'm like, did y'all really pull this in here? It could have just been done elsewhere. It didn't have to do anything. Like, vampires showed up for like all of 5 minutes, so skip. Skip. Just skip. Next on this list is Union Jack the Ripper. There are 3 or 4. You can skip this too. I was very confused for pretty much this entire series. No idea what was going on, and it constantly felt like I was missing something. Even when they were doing, like, I guess a flashback to see why Bulldog was looking the way he was looking, it's very confusing. The only one that I actually really liked would be the last one, because Bulldog is still a vampire. He's still a monster. He attacks because the master vampire, who I believe turned Bulldog, shows up and controls Bulldog and the other vampires. Bulldog turns Union Jack into a vampire, but Union Jack is able to resist it or whatever and kill him after What's-Her-Face kills Bulldog. Honestly, skip. Skip. I was so confused. If you do read it and you can understand what's happening without feeling like you've missed something, let me know. Next is the Black Panther Blood Hunt tie-in. I believe there's 3 or 4. You can't skip this. You just can't, because it's essential to Blade's plan. So you can't skip this, and it also shows the mental that Black Panther is going through after he gets turned into a vampire by Blade. So first of all, this was absolutely excellent. One of my faves. It did involve Shuri and what was going on in Wakanda. We do have Shuri interacting with Dr. Doom to seek assistance, and him basically saying, if you're not going to tell me where your brother was or if you're not going to tell me where your brother is or what his condition is, I'm not helping you. And she just wasn't going to give up that information because that's her brother. But this story was really, really great, and it does directly contribute to the big story. So this one I also give a 10. Absolutely phenomenal, because then it also gives background on Varney and what the fuck was going on. So and what gods actually ended up being involved, and how Khonshu was tied to like all of this. So this one I definitely liked. All of them recommend highly, especially because they are direct contributors to the story. So the next one is the Midnight Suns tie-ins. You cannot skip these. I would say that you kind of could, but you actually really can't, because Tulip shows up, and Tulip was directly connected to Blade in this whole situation back in the Blade series when they went up against the Adana. And she comes to the Midnight Suns because that used to be his team, and she comes to them about Blade being the villain in all of this. And then they in turn go to Victoria Montesi, whose family created the Montesi formula. And she says that if Blade has turned into what she's seeing, that the Midnight Suns are going to have to kill him. And then at the end of the Midnight Suns Blood Hunt Titan series, Tulip goes to where Blade is after he has taken like a sabbatical, and she finds him. So it's really a direct like contribution to the story, as they were headed in that direction, but they ended up being stopped at a hospital, which of course was part of that plan, because Blade shows up to fight them at the hospital. So 9 out of 10 on this. I wanted them to be a little bit more involved, but because he showed up at this particular hospital, he kind of kept them there. So that was part of his plan, was to keep them there and out of the way. Because had Victoria shown up with the rest of them and done what she done, because she does have control of Lilith, that shit would have been sideways and messy and not a part of his plan at all. So that's kind of why they kept them there, and I was impressed by that story. So 9 out of 10 on this one. Definitely recommend reading. Next one is also another favorite of mine. It is the Wolverine Blood Hunt tie-in. So this one I do not recommend skipping. They may not have been directly a part of the story, but there were mentions of what was going on when him and Nightguard found out that Blade was part of like the problem. Wolverine was actually really hurt, you could tell. And then Nightguard kind of just started doubting herself because she looked up to Blade. You know what I mean? So when they found all this out, it kind of messed with Wolverine's head a little bit, because he's not only teamed up with Blade, but they went against each other in the Blade Wolverine story about a vampire, when one thought the other was like the master of vampires or whatever, and they fought against each other. So I actually really love how they went about this, because at the end of these four, his military friend is like, all right, get over there so you can like get to the war. So we already know that this whole situation is not over. So kind of interested to see if he does end up interacting with Blade again at some point. So definitely recommend. 10 out of fucking 10. He ends up getting turned into a vampire in this series, and then she prevents him from continuing to be a vampire. It was so good. So definitely recommend. The Fantastic Four, I believe, has 3 books in this series, and they're pretty good. it was more so like how they were handling what was going on in Madison Square Garden. So like Reed was assisting people because he took Alicia into the city, and then the family was back at home being attacked by vampires and stuff like that. But I think they were mainly in this story because Doctor Doom ended up being the Sorcerer Supreme at the end of it, because at the end of the very last Fantastic Four tie-in, Reed sees that Victor Von Doom is now the Sorcerer Supreme. So we're about to get like a whole other story out of that. I would say this was probably about 7.5, 8 out of 10. As far as contributing to the story, it only really connects when they see that Victor Von Doom is part of, or has become, the Sorcerer Supreme. So next is the Miles Morales Spider-Man tie-ins. I think there's like 2 or 3 of those, where him and her name's not Ricochet. Him and the other girl whose name I can't remember. Honestly, I'm like really bad with names right now. I'm just sleepy. And they go up against Ramir again. So if you remember the whole situation in the back reading that was happening with Ramir, they go up against Ramir again because he gets released. They're together going up against Ramir, and then Brielle shows up. And then they go off with Brielle and Miles go off with Dracula. And it's also kind of just talking about how he now has to deal with being a vampire, because he does save a couple of people, but his mask is ripped and they see that he's a vampire. So of course they're like running afraid of him. So now he kind of just has to deal with his normal appearance, but he is still a vampire. So as for the Miles Morales tie-ins, I would say 7.5, 8 as well. You can't skip them though. So don't skip those. After that are a couple of one-shots. So you have the one-shot from Jubilee and you have the one-shot from Magic. You can skip the one-shots because they really don't have anything to do with the story. It's happening in their area. And because Jubilee used to be a vampire at one time, she goes and saves a girl who was also turned into a vampire, and she ends up going back with the group that she was with. But she doesn't stay with them. And then Magic is saving 2 kids whose entire village was killed by vampires, and then she just goes and kills a bunch of vampires. So you can skip those. They're actually both pretty good. I would give the Jubilee one, because it included the Unforgiven, the Forgiven, I'm sorry. Because it included the Forgiven, I would give it probably about a 9. And then the Magic one, I would say like an 8.5. So I did like them, but you don't have to read those. The next one is Psylocke and Werewolf by Night. Those are also one-shots, really. The Psylocke one was actually really, really, really fun. So I do definitely recommend that one. 10 out of 10 on that one, honestly. The Werewolf by Night one, I would say it was like a 7.5. That one, I wouldn't skip that one because especially if you're interested in what's going on with Werewolf by Night in October, I wouldn't skip it because it was basically kind of just like the introduction into the story for Werewolf by Night. So I wouldn't skip it if you're interested in the Werewolf by Night story coming up. If you are not interested, then you can skip it. The last 2 one-shots are Hulk and Laura Kinney. The Hulk one, I said this before, whenever the Hulk runs into vampires, it always just seems to be when he's randomly walking around, because this would be like the 2nd or 3rd time that he's bumped into them, and it's just because he's wandering, not because he's actively looking for them. So the Hulk Blood Hunt one shot, I would say probably about an 8. It was interesting. It's a very interesting story. And I wish they kind of like did more with that, but of course they didn't. And he's really just actually still wandering. The Laura Kinney one included Gabby, who is her sister, and they end up saving Dr. Dracula. They end up saving Dracula's son, but then they end up saving him. because then he starts like healing up after he drank Laura's blood. That one is interesting. If they pull something out of that, that would be great. I would say that one was probably about an 8 or 9 out of 10. I liked that one. It was definitely interesting because they were using mutants to see what the mutant blood would do on vampires, and essentially giving vampires powers. So it wasn't bad. I liked it. I would recommend reading at least that one. That one and the Psylocke one, 100% for sure. But yeah, those are all of the tie-ins. As an overall story, I give it a 9 out of 10. Only because, like, including all of the tie-ins, because Union Jack the Ripper and Venom had no business being there. None whatsoever. It didn't need to happen. There was no contribution to the story at all. It didn't even link to the story in some way other than the fact that there were vampires. And I was just irritated reading the both of those. But as overarching story, 9 out of 10. The tie-ins only, I would say I would put it probably about an 8.5. There were just some tie-ins that didn't need to be there. And then, of course, you already know I'm 10 out of 10, standing 10 toes down for the fact that Blood Hunt was an amazing run. That was a beautiful event. And, of course, the aftermath is perfect. The status quo, as they were saying, has changed. And they said that the status quo would change. So, I love it. But, of course, that is it for this episode. And I will see you guys on your next checkup.